Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Red Tool House.
On our YouTube channel, we talk about all things homesteading and try to implement some of those things on our rural 100 acres in southern West Virginia. Well, in today's conversation, Kelly and I wanted to get a discussion going about permaculture and permaculture with its application into homesteading. Some of the recent polls we've done with you all, there's been a lot of interest in permaculture, so we wanted to take a shot at that and get some discussion going. So this video is going to be more of a primer into permaculture and how it applies, or how it should apply, to we as homesteaders. Well, we should first start off with obviously defining permaculture. Not everybody knows what it is, or maybe doesn't have a full understanding of it. Well, there's really two guys that are considered the co-founders of permaculture, the whole concept, the term, they coined the phrase, and that's Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. They did this back in the 70s. And permaculture is really the mashup of two words, permanent or permanency, and culture, either culture or agriculture. So this concept of permanent agriculture or permanent culture. And that's a pretty broad, pretty vague definition. What is the actual application of that? I think it's really neat when you look at Jeff Lawton, who is if Bill and David are the fathers of permaculture, then maybe he's a stepfather. I don't know how that would work.
The grandson.
Well, but yeah, Jeff Lawton came in right behind Bill Mollison and actually studied under Bill Mollison on permaculture. So Jeff is right up there as far as considered one of the fathers, or maybe one of the sons of permaculture, if that makes any sense. But anyway, so Jeff defines permaculture as a system of design that provides for the needs of humanity while still benefiting the environment. So while that's still pretty broad, it dials it in a little bit. A system of design that provides all the needs for humanity. So you may say, well, what exactly are needs of humanity? But then also benefits the environment. Probably the best synonym to use with that, Kelly, is that we would all really kind of understand and wrap our brain around is sustainability. Is kind of the key there. What are sustainable practices? And of course, sustainability means
something that doesn't use finite resources that can potentially go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, sustainable is obviously, that's the definition of the word, something that can sustain itself. So sustainability is a very popular word, of course, and that gets thrown around just as much as the word permaculture does. But I think when you look at that element of sustainability, it's what systems can be designed that are sustainable, that don't use up a finite amount of resources, like you said, but have the ability to move forward into the future without a whole bunch of inputs. And if you actually look at Bill Mollison in one of his interviews, he says it really is a system that produces more energy than what's required to put into it. And obviously energy is a very broad term there, because energy could be quite a few things. We're not just talking about electric generation here. We're talking about a broad sense of energy. So it actually is producing more benefit than what it takes to create it or to get it rolling. So maybe almost like a perpetual motion machine in a sense. So if you were to ask the typical person, well, what is permaculture? What is kind of the key of permaculture, or what's the main ingredient of permaculture? A lot of people would say,
well, gardening and perennials versus annuals.
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of camp out around this concept. Well, the core of this is around veg. It's perennial gardening, food forest gardening systems that have, again, sustainable elements, versus annual gardening or even big ag type concepts. And while that is a large component of permaculture, it's by no means limited to that, and that is just one branch on a very multi-branch tree when you think about permaculture. In fact, some key elements of permaculture include gardening, of course, animal husbandry, waste management, recycling. You think about earthworks, aquaculture or water quality, soil building, and even natural building. Natural building materials are natural building when you think about houses or dwellings. So there's a lot of things that fall under that. So if you think, gardening, again, is just one of those many branches there. And a person involved in permaculture could go and specialize in so many different areas and never really even overlap in some others.
So maybe some things that permaculture is not is shunning technology. becoming a Luddite.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's, go back to the Stone Ages concept, because there's a lot of technology we're utilizing that really enhances sustainability in permaculture. The obvious one that comes to mind, of course, is solar. Solar is modern technology. In fact, there's all kinds of technological advances in solar, and that is a key element in permaculture when you look at producing electricity or even buildings, natural buildings. Those elements come into play as well.
Permaculture is not boycotting fossil fuels.
Right, yeah. I mean, obviously fossil fuels are a finite resource, and there is a key element when it comes to permaculture about addressing fossil fuels. But if you look, even Jeff Lawton, Bill Mollison, David Holmgren, those guys, they still utilize fossil fuels at times. Heavy equipment, when they're ready to do a big earthworks project, they're not coming in with shovels and spades and doing all of this. They're bringing in heavy equipment to move this stuff around. So, there's a time and a place for specific equipment, but it is also being aware of the consumption of fossil fuels and what all it takes there.
And permaculture is not necessarily going back to old ways.
Yeah. So if you think of, from a homesteading perspective, we think, well, let's go back, 200 years ago or 100 years ago and homestead the way our ancestors did. And that's not really parallel with permaculture. We've discovered that a lot of the ways that we did things, and I say we, I'm looking at this from an American perspective. You look at colonization of America over the 200 years, that there was a lot of things that settlers did that weren't necessarily the best for the environment. I mean, there could be a lot of discussion. It's a whole nother video to talk about the pros and cons of plowing, till versus no-till, all that type of stuff. But if you look at the development of the great American breadbasket, all this agriculture, we see that we're losing tons and tons of topsoil in that process. And again, that went back to the industrialization era where we didn't have to use a team of oxen and a single plow to plow ground. We can now use internal combustion engine and be able to turn a lot. So we're not necessarily backing up and saying, well, let's do things the way our ancestors did, because they didn't necessarily do things in a permaculture way either. Cat fight.
And permaculture is not necessarily an isolational attitude.
Yeah. Again, when you think of this concept of being sustainable and maintaining something on your own, especially homesteaders, we tend to want to pull back and say, well, this is our turf, this is our little homestead. We're not really looking outward as much. But permaculture is not that. Permaculture definitely has an element of when you're providing for the needs of society and the needs of humankind, then it's not just you and your own, it's everyone. So are you doing something that has a regenerative or a sustainable element that expands beyond the borders of your homestead?
And also leaving the land that you have better off when you've left it than where it was when you began.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of leave it better than you found it. And that carries over generationally. So even on our place, if our boys want to do something with this, then hopefully I've left it in better shape than what I found it. If they don't, then whoever would buy this and take off with it, hopefully they've got a more improved piece of property than when we had it. Well, some may be wondering, okay, Troy, are you an authority on permaculture? Do you have a PDC, a permaculture design certificate? Have you taken any permaculture courses? No, I have not. So, no, I am not an authority. I will not pretend to be. I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I am not an authority on this. But I do want to approach this entire discussion, not only in this video, but in videos going forward that we do, is I really want to look at permaculture from a practical standpoint. Not all of us, in fact, probably most of us aren't going to be able to go out and take our PDC, to get hardcore into that, to take all these classes, because you require weeks and weeks of training to do that. There's some online courses, but really hands-on PDC is going to take minimum of 2 weeks. Some go as many as 6 weeks. And you're looking at a large investment of time and money. But I want to bring a perspective of, as a typical homesteader who would like to implement permaculture elements, let's look at it from that way. So what's practical? What's something we can learn and kind of all learn together as we move forward here on how to implement permacultural elements to our homestead?
Well, since you brought up the comparison of homesteading versus permaculture, what are some of those differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. There's, I I think there's some parallels. I think there are some differences. Again, this whole definition of homesteading is always this moving target. But if you look at some of the key elements of homesteading, so you want to be self-reliant. You kind of want to produce your own goods, whether it's your food, products, those type of things. Try to live off your own land as much as possible. And for a lot of us, it's quit our day job. I want to homestead full time, so I want to stay at home. So if you compare that to some of the key points of permaculture, and again, this is extremely crude and rudimentary, but it's you want to be sustainable, you want to recycle as much as you can, you want to reduce inputs as much as possible, and you want to reduce or eliminate pollution. So how do those mesh? Well, again, if you look at homesteading, living off our land, well, that hopefully is sustainable. But living off our land doesn't necessarily mean that we're using sustainable practices. I mean, I could still try to raise all my own food here on our homestead and do things in a manner that big conventional ag would be doing. Big investment in machinery, big investment in sprays and chemicals, using tons and tons of water to produce my crop. I could do all those things. So it doesn't necessarily mean living off my land makes me use sustainable practices. But there are ways to be self-reliant that can marry into permaculture. But you look, if all of us homesteaders want to quit our day job and stay at home, then that means you're driving a vehicle to work less. You're not taking it to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week or however often you work. So in essence, okay, wow, I'm burning less fossil fuels. I'm reducing pollution just because I'm parking my vehicle. I'm not going to an office or a workplace every day. So some of those things can overlap. Homesteaders, we like to be frugal. So we like to recycle building materials. We like to do things with stuff. Thank you.
No, mosquito.
We like to do things with stuff we have laying around. And that kind of comes back to the permaculture concept: recycle as much as possible. So there are a lot of parallels. There are a lot of places where we overlap, but there are some things too where there are differences that homesteaders aren't necessarily completely congruent with permaculturalists. So I think it's interesting, and this is where I don't want to say controversial because I try to stay away from all that, but I think it's interesting. Permaculture's been around long enough that there's now been so much division, so many tentacles to this where people have spread out and gotten into things. Just like any movement, any ideal that's spreading well, people take that and go with it in a certain direction. So I think there's extremes of permaculture that we're seeing now, and it's kind of funny. I listen to a lot of things, read a lot of things pertaining to permaculture and homesteading and all that. So get all these different sources, and you see that there's the extremes. There's people that I would say go to one extreme that are hardcore capitalists that are using permaculture. They've gotten their PDC. They're using permaculture just because it's a job. I'm certified in this area. I want to make money. I want to get out and you get some big design jobs. Like an interior designer or a landscape designer, may not necessarily buy into the details of all that, but they're just seeing it as an opportunity to make money. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with capitalism. It's just you see people go on that extreme with permaculture. They may not truly understand or respect the motivation behind permaculture and its intent. But then there's the opposite side of that, the other side of the spectrum, and you and I have talked about this a bit and have kind of had a chuckle at it, that it's almost become a religion to some point, that there's some people, and again, I don't like to even stereotype people, but I think there's some groups out there where if you're not going full-blown minimalist, if you still drive a car, if you still are plugged into the grid, if your house is still made out of 2x4s and not, mud or cob or whatever, then you're not there yet. And if this minimalistic, rewilding, almost social anarchy concept is where people have taken this, and you're not there unless you've gone this far, and it really becomes almost a cult to some degree.
So where would we fall?
Well, we haven't built the temple yet, so we don't have the permaculture temple constructed. No, I think all of us feel that we're somewhere in between. I don't know that anyone would say, well, yeah, I'm the religious permaculture nut on this side, or the guy says, oh, I'm the blatant capitalist that's just in it for the money. But I think, you do an evaluation, see where you fall. But we all want to be that moderate. We all want to be somewhere in the middle there. But I think maybe there's some elements of permaculture that I don't buy into. And it's because maybe it's more of I don't have a full understanding of it. As we learn more as we go along, then we'll get a better understanding. But I got no problem with, if you've got experience and knowledge and know-how in permaculture, making money from that, selling your knowledge, sharing your IP with other people. Maybe that allows you to reinvest in your own permacultural design elements. So I got no problem with that either. So I'd like to see think that there's pros and cons to the both sides, but we all want to kind of hang out in the middle there. So when looking at this movement called permaculture, there's some stereotypes that have developed, of course, and there's some misconceptions or concepts that people have. Well, in our discussion that we've had with friends and acquaintances, we usually run into 3 questions that just keep coming up all the time.
Do I have to have unkempt hair and a beard to do permaculture?
No, Kelly. Facial hair and a shaggy mop are not required for permaculture. But it does help you blend in with a crowd of permaculturalists. Women, if you can grow beards, go for it.
Do I have to smoke weed to be a permaculturalist?
No, you do not have to start using marijuana to be a permaculturalist. But if you're hanging out with a group of them around a campfire on Saturday night and somebody breaks out a guitar, prepare for a contact high.
Can I still bathe and use deodorant if I'm going to be into permaculture?
Yes, you are still allowed to bathe, but you have to bathe less frequently. And if you use deodorant, you have to cover up that smell with some sort of essential oil.
Obviously, we're having a little fun with some permy stereotypes.
Yeah. Again, that's to poke a bear with a stick, maybe, but no, that's just a little fun there. If trying to boil this conversation down into practical applications for homesteaders, where does that end up? Where do you begin? So if you're a homesteader, like us, that's you're trying to do the best you can on your homestead. You're trying to become more self-reliant, but you want to start incorporating permaculture practices into what you're doing. Where do you begin? And that's the question that we run into all the time. We ask it ourselves, but we run into it constantly. And that is, well, do I need to start with a PDC? Do I need to go get a permaculture design certificate? Do I need to have someone with a PDC come in here and design the whole layout? While there's obviously pros to that, not everybody can just uproot and go take a design course, as we've talked about. But on the flip side, not everybody has the resources to come in and A, pay a designer, but B, pull the trigger on what the designer is recommending. That can get expensive. So where do you start? Well, I think the obvious thing is observation. And those of you that are into permaculture be like, well, wait a minute, Troy, that's point 1 in permaculture design is observation. Yes, absolutely. If you're going to start doing a design, you observe how the land reacts to all kinds of different things. But I'm using observation to even go further back. As a homesteader, if you look and say, observe what you've got going on your homestead. So that first observation is, are you starting to look at things you're doing on your homestead and setting up through the lens of permaculture? So again, understanding the definition of permaculture: sustainable, benefits humankind, benefits the environment, doesn't hurt the environment, requires less inputs, those type of things. So if you start looking through that lens, you say, okay, well, I'm raising hogs, as we're raising hogs. Am I doing it in a permaculture way? No, there's some things we need to do to make this, to reduce our inputs. Chickens, am I doing this? My gardening processes, am I doing that? All these different things. Maybe you've planted an orchard. Am I doing permaculture practices with my orchard? So first you're looking at that and examining what you've got going on in your homestead to say, I'm doing a bunch of stuff that's making me self-reliant and making me a good defined homesteader, but they really don't have permaculture elements to it. Or you may say, wow, I've done more than I thought I have. And what's interesting is you may discover, as we did, as we started thinking about these things, there's some things that are like, oh, wow, okay, that makes sense, or wow, we are really far off from that. We really got to work hard to try to turn that ship around, because while we're doing things that are more homesteading related, more natural processes, they still require a lot of inputs. So as you look at things through that lens, do you say, okay, what small changes can I make to reduce my inputs, or what things can I do to maybe reduce the amount of waste that I'm producing, or what things can I do to recycle more, or what things can I do to function stack? And we're going to do another whole video on function stacking, but what things can I do to get multiple uses out of one process? So kind of start breaking that down and looking at those elements.
And step 2 is to start small. So as you observe, where are some steps that you can take that are not huge projects to undertake?
Yeah, good point. And the thing that comes to mind when you say that, Kelly, is we think about Cam's chickens. For those of you that are familiar with our channel, our youngest son has a small flock, about 13 chickens, egg layers, that he takes care of and sells the eggs. So it's a little side business for him. Well, those chickens I've always been down in the valley. We're sitting up at the house site. The house is right here behind us. Down to my right, over the hill, is kind of where all of our stuff happens, where the pigs are. That's where the chickens are. So his chickens were down there. Well, every day, because he had to take food and water to them, he would load up the side-by-side that's parked here at the house, drive it down the driveway, down into the meadow, and then take care of the chickens, and of course, drive back up. And we decided at one point, well, let's move the chickens up here. We had them in a chicken tractor, and as they started laying eggs, we really wanted them to be in a little bit bigger area, and we wanted to incorporate them around our small garden we have behind the house here. So we moved them up here, and then I realized after the fact, it's like, wow, that was a step in the right direction with a permaculture lens. Looking at it through a permaculture lens, it's like, that was a step in the right direction, because we stopped by having them right here and again, we won't get into zone discussion, but having him right here in zone 1, Camlin doesn't have to get on the side-by-side, drive down and drive back. So if you look at that, what did we do? Well, we just reduced one input there. We don't have the gasoline burned to drive the side-by-side up and down the driveway every day. So think about it, we've just reduced 365 trips a year on the side-by-side. The wear and tear on that vehicle, it's side-by-side tires, the ATV tires on the pavement, they're not good on the tires, so it wears those down. So we've eliminated that one step, which is just simply taking the chickens from further away and bringing them up here. Cat, go away. So those type of things, as you mentioned, Kelly, just starting small. To me, that wasn't the motive for why we moved them up here. We had a different motive, but we saw the benefits that came from that. It's like, wow, okay, that's pretty neat. Now we still, have an electric fence back here that's plugged into the grid, so it's still producing, still taking electricity from the grid. Now, granted, I could obviously put a solar charger on that, and that would reduce another input of purchased electricity, or the electricity that feeds our grid is coal-fired. So you could argue that, okay, we're using less coal-fired electricity in that sense. So there's little basic things you can do with your existing operation that have permacultural benefits to them.
Step 3 would be to look at projects that help you just as much as they may help the environment. I know that sounds selfish, but it may just adjust your attitude to get you more on board with making these changes on your farm. And I think of the water catchment that we did for the chicken coop. So the water catchment for the chicken coop, we were having to fill up a 55-gallon drum of water on a regular basis, and Troy would have it in his tractor and take it down to the chicken coop, which is again down in the valley. So Troy ended up putting a gutter on the coop, and we had 55-gallon drum that we were going to recycle for these purposes, and so hooked that up to catch the water hooked that up to the bell waterer. So that saves us on the diesel for the tractor and using our well to fill up the water.
Yeah, that's a great point, because again, just like the side-by-side, not driving the tractor down there, so we've saved on diesel. We're not pulling water out of the well, so we're not using electricity again to pull water out of the well. We're simply catching rainwater off the roof of the coop, going down in the gutter, filling up the 55-gallon drum. That was a recycled drum, like you had mentioned. So it saves on those inputs. So we don't have those inputs. And when you looked at it, the motivation for me was not, I want to save diesel and I want to save electricity. And the motivation was me, I don't want to have to do that every couple of days. I would love to say, I don't have to worry about that. Let's go do something else. Right. And the cool thing about that is the way that's working now is it's pretty much autopilot from spring till October. It's good. You know, it fills up. And we get enough rain around here that keep that thing full. And the only thing that I have to do is obviously when winter hits, then I have to take it down because everything would freeze. And then every once in a while we'll get up and clean. I've got a screen over the intake from the gutter, so I have to clean that screen to make sure there's not a lot of leaves and detritus there that's blocking it. But yeah, that was something that benefited me first, but had, again, permacultural-like benefits to it. And that's why I would say look at some practical things. You can say, what can I do to streamline or to automate or to reduce inputs that are going to benefit me directly? If you've got something that requires tons and tons of gasoline or diesel, and you say, hey, I've put something in place that eliminates that or cuts it in half, then you've already reduced the cost of purchasing that fossil fuel. So it's the big benefit there.
And then step 4 is just try something new. And one of the things that we did is use the back to Eden method on the tomatoes that we planted this year. So we just planted them and surrounded them with wood chips.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, experiment or try something new. Try something new, again, looking through the lens of right. Permaculture and saying, well, let's try something different. We've done straw bale gardening. We've done all kinds of different things, raised beds, all that type of stuff, no-till. But we really we thought, well, let's try this back to Eden. We had just watched the documentary and thought, let's give that a shot. And that's worked out really well. And while back to Eden falls under a permacultural branch, depending on how you put it together. So to us, that fit really well. But that was something new that we tried. It requires a lot less water, so I'm not pumping water out of the well to water the plants. I don't have to add any, not that I would, but I wouldn't add any weed killer to kill the weeds. The wood chips keep the weeds to a minimum, so it's reduced a lot of that. So there's just a lot of little different things. The benefits come from that are helping the environment or reducing inputs. So I think as homesteaders, if we look at those 4 steps and go through those, then we can start moving our homestead in the direction of embracing permacultural practices, which I think would be a benefit for our homestead and, of course, for the environment. But it's one of those things, as a homesteader starting out, you want to start small. In marketing, when we work with startup businesses, we encourage them to set goals that are achievable. So if you're going to set goals, don't say, well, I'm going to turn this whole 100 acres into a permaculture paradise, and that's where I'm going to start. Good luck with that. If you set small goals that are achievable, then you can cross those off your list. Well, okay, I did this, I did that, I did water catchment, I incorporated some solar here, I did this type of thing. Then you can start to cross some of these goals off, and that usually builds confidence with most people. And again, in our business consulting, that's what we find is you get that confidence. Okay, I'm ready to try something new, maybe something a little more challenging, maybe something a little more complicated. I have the confidence to do it because I've had success in the past. So I think that's a good place to start. For those of you watching that maybe have your PDC or you have a really cool permaculture setup, you may be rolling your eyes and thinking, okay, wait a minute, Troy, that's not permaculture. And you're right, we can't say, well, because we have water catchment in our chicken coop and because we have an automatic chicken door and we don't drive the side-by-side of the tractor as much as we used to, that we're now a permaculture farm. No, that's not what I'm implying, that we're incorporating some of these processes to get us down that road. There are a lot more things permaculture based I'd like to implement. And again, we'll take you all along on that ride with videos as we get to that point. But it's a start. And again, it's really just changing our mindset and how we look at things and really changing our attitude. And in closing, something that sticks out to me that Bill Mollison said in an interview that I saw a while back is that he would like everyone to embrace the concept of permaculture. But for permaculture to be accepted by the masses, it has to have practical and even financially beneficial application and benefits from it. Again, our entire world is money driven. We are in a capitalistic economy where the world basically survives off money right now. So permacultural elements have to still produce financial benefits. And again, whether that turns into actual cash or investment of property or an improvement of property on down the road so the property value is higher, that's the devil in the details there. But even the father of permaculture admits that permaculture, to be accepted by the masses, still has to produce some financial gain to it. And while that may sound capitalistic and greedy, I really like that point. That sticks out to me because that's how you elicit change. There's always going to be people on the fringe that I'm doing this because I'm a hardcore tree hugger, or I'm doing this because whatever XYZ reason. But to get everybody on board, then there still has to be some mutual benefit that everyone would relate to. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, everybody relates to money. Well, I want to give some resources that we like to use and that I think would be beneficial. If you're totally new to permaculture and really don't fully understand it, you've heard that word tossed around, and you want the 40,000 foot elevation definition of it, then I'm going to link below to a video. It's a YouTube video. It's only 4 minutes long. And it's interviewing Bill Mollison and David Holmgren and just really ask them, what is permaculture? So in 4 minutes, they describe it. So it's a really useful video, very, very quick. It's almost like an elevator speech, what we call in marketing.
Much less than this right here.
Yeah, much shorter than what we're talking about. Yes, absolutely. And another great resource is the Permaculture Research Institute. And this is kind of the mothership. I think Jeff Lawton pretty much heads this up. But it's a nonprofit organization that's all about permaculture. And you can find them at permaculturenews.org. So go check that out. There's a ton of resources there, forums, classes, just stuff that'll blow your mind. Again, you can get way into some of these specialties and really just lose yourself in tons and tons of research on permaculture.
Well, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and comment below if you'd like to see more videos about permaculture.
Yeah, this is our first permaculture discussion, so if you like this discussion and we're not going to just sit here in our chairs and talk every single time. Hopefully we're going to actually implement some of these things as we move forward. But yeah, comment below and let us know if you like these. I've been getting good feedback of where to steer the channel. You guys have given us great input there. So just let us know below. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to subscribe. Appreciate everybody that does. We do videos 3 times a week, so check us out Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And if you haven't checked out our website lately, check it out, redtoolhouse.com. Sign up for our e-newsletter and get the latest updates in your email as well. All right, take care, everybody. For those of you offended by Kelly's questions, I'll post her email below so you can send her some comments. You don't like that?
Say it.
You don't like that idea? All right.